Forum this afternoon, so thank you all for joining us. I'd like to welcome those of you that are joining from the Project Management User Group, as well as those of you joining from the Business Analyst Networking Group. We're really excited to have our first joint forum of the two user groups to get together for this really important, and hopefully you'll find it very timely as well, topic of building your business cases. I know the biennial budget process has already kind of kicked off, and most agencies are in the process of working on those initial business cases for their budget asks and to get through that prioritization process. So today we have brought back, at least for the Business Analyst Networking Group, it's a bringing back of Rebecca Craven to talk to us about how to build a business case. Rebecca, I'm sure you've talked to PMUG as well before, as you presented for many groups and taught on the topic, who knows how many times by now, right? Yeah. So she shouldn't be a new face or name for most of us. She is very good at teaching us how to build our business cases, and we've had her multiple times for the Bang forums. I think this will be your third time joining us in the short 3 or 4 years that we've even been around. So I'm excited to see how Rebecca takes her business case lesson for us today to the next level. So please join me in welcoming Rebecca. And with that, you can go ahead and take over.
Great, thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. I see a lot of very familiar names and some familiar faces in the list of folks attending here. Thanks for joining us and talking about business cases this afternoon. I appreciate you all taking time out of your busy schedules to do this with us. Let me go ahead and share from my phone. And I'll just caveat this. This is my third time presenting to Bang. I've never had the same job or been in the same place for one of these presentations, and this time is no different. So I'm now at PERS, and I've been off work for the last 2.5 weeks with some family stuff. So it's nice to see all of my PERS folks as well that I haven't seen in the last couple of weeks. Let me do this real quick. And don't know if that worked.
I'm seeing your presentation.
Oh, you are? Okay, good. I am not, so this will be fun. I can see it on my phone though. So what is business analysis and project management if not rolling with all the kinds of fun technical things that you can possibly have happening, right? Okay, well, we're going to jump into building blocks for better business cases. As Tim said, I've been here before, but for those of you who don't know me, this is me, the same picture. I need to get a new headshot. I've been using this one for about 10 years now. But you can find me at PERS. I'm the Modernization Program Director at PERS. So we do a lot of business case discussion and development as part of that program. I'm also a PhD candidate in Public Affairs and Policy at Portland State University. One of the courses I teach includes developing a business case as part of the deliverables of the curriculum. I'm a PMP and PMI PBA, which I think are the most important things for this group. As I'm sure many of you have many letters after your name. Same thing for me, but those are the two that I think are most relevant for this group. And you can find me at PERS and at Portland State University again. So that's the boring biographical stuff. This is the disclaimer that I want to make sure that, especially since we have some DAS folks on the line and EIS folks as well. This session represents my thoughts and opinions. I have some connections to EIS via previous positions, but I am not EIS. Make sure that you're consulting with your senior IT portfolio manager and assigned oversight analyst if you are working on business cases. They have lots of experience and many ways to help you develop business cases as well. Just consider this another set of thoughts and ideas that may help in the business case process. All right. I'll just jump right into it. So I saw this GIF a while ago, and it reminded me a lot of what many people I think experience when their agencies find out they need to write a business case for some reason. So this poor kid has been being told to punch a punching bag, and he's doing it, but he's not happy about it. I think that resonates with me and the experience that I've had with a lot of folks starting the business case process. They're going to do it, but boy, are they not going to be happy about it. And what we want is the ability as project managers, as business analysts, to start this process off with our agencies so that we minimize this kind of participation and get, the more enthusiastic participation that we're looking for. So I saw a lot of laughing faces. I have a feeling that the GIF is funny, but also I think there are a lot of you on the call that have probably experienced this as well. People hear business case, they kind of lose their minds a little bit in some cases, or look at it as kind of a punitive thing that they have to do rather than something that is a beneficial part of a business decision-making process. And what we're trying to do with this presentation today is get more towards how our organizations can start looking at business cases in that beneficial way rather than that punitive way. We want to minimize the crying punching bag episodes that we have as we develop business cases. So one of the things that we can do with that is a lot of building blocks around how to set up your organization for success. So I want to start off by saying I've been to Bang twice in the recent past, and one of those two presentations was, really getting into the nitty-gritty statement, how do you develop alternatives, that sort of a thing. Session, we're not going to necessarily be talking about all of that stuff in as much detail as I have in the past. I'm sure the Bang forum would be happy to provide access to that previous presentation. I also have the slides. I'm happy to send those to folks as well, because I know a lot of you probably are interested in how do you write a problem statement, how do you develop alternatives, that sort of a thing. Very important, very critical. But from my perspective and what we're talking about today, what we're really looking to get into is how you build a castle that will last rather than a Jenga tower that is missing a bunch of foundational pieces and at risk of falling over at the slightest, sneeze. We want to build business cases that resonate and really help our organizations make the decisions and then communicate those decisions in effective ways. So, there is the sort of set of mechanics that go into the actual written business case, but there's also a foundational kind of understanding of what business cases are and how we should approach them as organizations. That's, I think, equally as critical. So we're looking to build castles, not Jenga towers. And there's never been a metaphor that I haven't tried to torture, and we'll start with houses for this one. Just like a house, right? We have the foundation that is critical for everything else that's built upon it. In my opinion, there are lots of elements of a business case that are not in the written business case itself. They're part of this foundation that help situate the business case within the decision-making processes of an organization. Like a house, we also have functional areas of the house that make it a house. The work of being a home is part of what that house does. You need your bathroom, you need your bedroom, you need your closet, staircase if you have multiple levels, that sort of a thing. So we're looking for those functional pieces that are in that business case itself, the things like alternatives and all of that. But I think there is an overemphasis on what I call the roof, which is what's visible from the 30,000 foot level. If you've ever been on a plane, you can't see anything about the houses except maybe their pools and backyards. But mostly you're looking at roofs as you fly across the country and fly over houses. That's kind of what the written business case is. It's really important. You don't have a house without a roof. But the emphasis on the roof to the detriment of the rest of the house is kind of a problem. If you don't have the underlying foundation to support that roof and hold it up, then all you have is a cabana. So if we take that metaphor again and torture it a little bit, the foundation is what I call the organizational agreements, or the ways that the organization has decided to approach and use business cases. I don't think that we talk about that enough. And that's the kind of conversation that you don't want to be in the middle of writing a business case and starting to figure out. You don't want to be in the middle of building the bathroom and decide that you have to start putting the foundation in underneath it after the shower's already in, for example. The things that we mostly talk about with business cases are part of those functional areas. So are things like our criteria, our alternatives, our assumptions and constraints, any data that we're going to use to support the decision-making process or the explanation of the alternatives. And then most importantly, that problem or need statement. What are we trying to address with the business case? And then the communication method, I think, is what that roof is. Again, overly emphasized, especially as we talk about business cases, everyone's focused on how do we fill out that template for the business case. I think if we take a step back and focus on the foundation, as well as some of those functional areas, we get to a better written product anyway. So, starting with what the communication method is going to be, it's kind of like building the roof first and then putting the foundation in later. So this presentation is primarily focused on those organizational agreements and what I mean by that and how you can start having some of those conversations before you start writing a business case, as well as some of the ways to incorporate some of those conversations into business case development, knowing where we're at in the biennium and that a lot of you are probably already writing business cases. So I don't want to totally discount the entirety of the roof, if you will, the communication method, especially for those of you who are writing formal business cases. There's a lot of literature out there about business cases. The state of Oregon through VIS has a particular business case for IT investments. But regardless of what you're using and which pieces of literature you read, almost all of them have the same general set of foundational elements to them. Those are a business need or rationale, that's your problem or opportunity statement, the thing that you're trying to address as a business, the alternatives that you considered when looking at how you would address that business need. Those all need to include some element of analysis and not just kind of descriptive and or opinion of those alternatives. Things like cost benefit analysis, risk assessments, and feasibility analysis are really important for that. The level to which you get into the details of those depends on what stage you're at in terms of defining what it is that you're trying to do from a business perspective, but also the approach to business cases that your organization has decided to take. You also need to have eventually a recommendation and an implementation approach. I think that there is a tendency to skip directly to the recommendation and implementation approach and then kind of back into some alternatives that could have been taken instead of the thing that we wanted to do in the first place. The goal of the business case process, though, is to not start from a point of having a decision and work your way backwards, but to really use the business case process to structure that decision-making effort and then to make that decision via the business case. I've cited Vicki James here. This is an article that I use quite a bit when I'm looking at explaining what business analysis is and how to bring that into decision-making processes to my students. So I recommend that if you are interested in some of the some additional literature around that. There are a lot of articles out there about business analysis, though, and the kind of systematic approach to decision-making and how that can be beneficial. So going back to our roof here, again, that's this communication method in the case of a formal business case. We tend to overly emphasize how we're going to communicate decisions rather than thinking through how it is that we need to go about making decisions. Communication, again, very important. But if you're starting with the roof, again, you're kind of missing that opportunity to build that foundation and really come to those agreements about what a business case is and can be for the organization. Just a reminder, because I know there are a lot of folks that are going to face some concern from their organizations. You do need to be systematic and consider all alternatives equally. So if you're going to do a feasibility analysis and a cost benefit analysis for the thing that you prefer to do or that your organization prefers to do, you need to do it for all the alternatives. Systematic and relatively objective is definitely an element of formal business case development. Yet another metaphor, but bear with me. A written business case is just the metaphorical tip of the iceberg. There's so much that needs to prop up a good written business case that if you only focus on what's above the water, you're missing all of that stuff that's needed to keep that iceberg afloat and have it maintain its shape and all of that sort of stuff. So written business case is super important, especially I think our dads and the IS folks would agree. Really important to see a good quality written business case as an output of the business case process. But if you just focus on writing a business case, you're missing that opportunity to set that foundation. So when I say building blocks for a successful foundation, again, going back to the house, no more icebergs. We'll try and stick with one metaphor. But going back to the house, our organizational agreements and our building blocks within that sort of foundation are, from my perspective, these 5 items listed here. And I have business case definition as the biggest one because, in my opinion, that is the one that is the most difficult to get to agreement on. And it's also the one that kind of underpins all the rest of those building blocks as well. If we don't have the same idea of what a business case is, then we're not going to be able to agree on how it fits into things like decision-making processes and who's responsible for that business case. So business case definition is, in my opinion, the most important one. The way that a business case fits into organizational decision-making processes, as well as when a business case is needed, are the two that are most likely going to have differences based on your organization's operating style, your leadership preferences, that sort of thing. So making sure that those two kind of talk to each other and are in sync with each other is really important. And then roles and responsibilities and organization standards, those are important, but can also vary based on how mature your organization is, how many business cases you write on a regular basis, and where you see business cases fitting into the sort of day-to-day work of what the organization is that you work for. So these 5 things are what we're going to talk about today. So that was a very long preamble, sorry, to get to the 5 things that we're actually going to talk about today. And I think there's a lot of business case definition that is going to be a bit of a review for those who have come to these presentations that I've done before. So we'll go through each of these and have just a little bit of information as well as an opportunity for discussion about some of these and how you all see these fitting into some of the discussions that you are or are not having within your organizations right now. So the business case definition, this is from the PMI Guide to Business Analysis. I've never met a PMI guide that I didn't want to cite. So here's a citation from this one. And basically this says that a business case does a whole bunch of things. It's a documented feasibility study. It establishes the validity of benefits. It establishes whether an organization should even address the problem or opportunity. It presents root causes or contributors to success, establishes objectives, establishes the value that is expected, and communicates the value proposition. And then for you project management folks, it also is a major input to the charter, which I think, most of us who have written a charter, one of the first questions is, well, where's the business case and what are we trying to achieve here? That's a lot of what goes into that sort of formal written business case, what we're trying to communicate and what we're trying to get to through a business case process. So again, PMI Guide to Business Analysis, I find that guide helpful. The other one from IIBA is also pretty descriptive of what a business case should be. So either of those are good sources of kind of objective bodies of knowledge if one of the things that you need to do with your organization is set expectations for what that business case needs to eventually communicate or describe on behalf of the organization's decision-making process. This is one of those things that I find helpful to kind of start weeding out things that people might think are business cases that are in fact not business cases. I got in trouble the last time I presented this because I said that business cases are not persuasive. And what I meant was that they're not persuasive through rhetoric. So we're not setting up rhetorical arguments, to try and make a point. We're using analysis to persuade that a particular course of action or no course of action is in the best interests of the organization based on the elements of the business case. Business cases aim to be objective and not subjective. One of the things that we try to do with the business case is document a process so that if we follow the same steps with the same people, with the same data and inputs, we should arrive at the same conclusion. That's one of the ways that we know that we're not being subjective and following the whims or preferences of whoever is in charge of making decisions at the moment. I put an asterisk after those because if you're a critical scholar, nothing's objective, but we're trying to be as objective as we can be with these to remove that sort of element of subjectivity and personal preference from what we're doing here. A business case is a systematic review of each alternative. It's not a fully detailed explanation of all the things in the alternative that we want to do and a sort of nod that there are other alternatives out there. We try to be systematic and equally consider all of the alternatives that have been identified. So that's, I think, also an important piece that is different from trying to, go up and make a pitch for a particular course of action. And then business cases are also inclusive of all data and measurement types. There are a lot of folks that think that if something is under a certain dollar value, that means we don't need to do any sort of detailed decision making. There are other elements that would go into whether you need a business case for something or not, just besides cost. I had someone in the not so recent past call me and say, "Hey, I just found out that one of our alternatives actually costs $10,000. Guess we don't have a business case anymore." And I said, whoa, wait a second. We have a lot more to consider here besides just how much something costs. So, there's a benefit to going through and considering all the kinds of things that you want to evaluate to understand what the best course of action is. And that's not just how much something costs or how much the return on investment is necessarily. Things that are not business cases. This is my favorite list, and I probably should add things to this that have been pitched as business cases. Business cases are not case studies. Case studies are specific research, or a specific research technique that can be part of a business case, but are not in and of themselves business cases. Pilots and POCs, those we typically see come after a business case to help prove out or further explicate some of the assumptions, constraints, and or benefits that we assume that the recommended alternative will provide. White papers, policy positions, position statements, sales pitches, all of those things that are focused on pitching and defending one particular course of action to the exclusion of others. Those are not business cases. Opinion pieces, we all have opinions. The goal here is to get away from opinions and into analysis. And then last but not least, mandates. There are many ways that you can react to a mandate, and those would be things that we would expect to see in a business case. The mandate is not in and of itself a business case. So again, we're looking for analysis that's relatively objective, follows a documented process that can be repeated, and systematically reviews alternatives using all kinds of data and measurement that are available. This is my biggest, if you take nothing else from this, this is the thing I want you to take from this.
Hey, Rebecca.
Business cases are not documents. A business case is a process. So I firmly believe that the process to get to the written document is as important as the written document itself, because that tells us how deliberative we are being in our decision making and whether we have done the due diligence that we need to do to make that decision that we're proposing in the business case itself. Again, general process steps, cited an article from Harvard Business Review that outlined these, but there are many, many pieces of literature that you can find here that have basically the same steps. But going through these with your organization to get to a point where you are then communicating the case, that's where we are looking to get to, away from the idea that a business case is a document and into the idea that business case is a process. Tim, I see your hand.
Yes, got a question in the chat for you.
Sure.
And I wanted to catch you before you went too much further, because I'm pretty sure it has to do with your completing statements on the last slide.
Sure.
So the question is, can you say more about which alternatives should be reviewed? There are sometimes many solutions, but it seems like not all of them are reasonable in terms of cost, resources, timeline, etc. What's the best way to discern which alternatives make the cut to be included in the business case?
Yes, I can definitely say more about that. And before I do, I'll just jump ahead and answer Julie's question. Yes, slides will be shared with attendees. The alternatives, yes, there are an infinite number of alternatives. I used to have a really great, I thought about leaving it in and I took it out, but the universe of alternatives is infinite, right? You can decide to do all kinds of things with, whatever decision-making process you have. The things that you use to whittle down those alternatives are your assumptions and constraints, followed by your problem and opportunity statement. So, if your problem and opportunity statement has to do with, I'm going to make something up, improving voter registration, there are going to be assumptions and constraints about what that means, as well as timeframes around that. And then also the thing that you're trying to do, if there's more detail besides just improving voter registration. So improving voter registration 2 weeks after an election occurs is not going to help you, right? So one of your assumptions or constraints would likely needs to be achievable within an election cycle. Well, having everyone have personal voter registrant that goes to their house and make sure they all get registered is probably not going to fit into your alternatives then, if you have to hire, one person for every potential voter and send them out. You can, that is a thing that you could do conceivably, but your assumptions and constraints, things like timeframes, the objectives and strategic direction of the agency or organization, the available funding that you have. I think a lot of us are preparing business cases in anticipation of asking for money, but I think most of us have a logical assumption or constraint related to budget that we can think of. I'm not going to go ask for something that costs $1 billion because my entire organization's budget is not $1 billion for operations. That would be so much beyond what our organization asks for. There are other elements of government, especially where asking for $1 billion might not be that big of a deal, because of the sizes of budgets and things like that. So, you take some of those things into consideration, some of the things that relate to the actual problem that you're trying to solve, which makes that problem and need statement really important, but also some of those logical assumptions and constraints around what it is that is actually feasible, and use those to start whittling down the alternatives. Us, going off and doing genetic research to create a unicorn. Yes, thing we could do, not going to help with voter registration. So, whittle that out because it doesn't address the problem or opportunity that we're trying to take advantage of. Don't ask for things that are $1 billion if your agency's budget is usually, 10 million. That would be too high. Don't ask for things that are going to take 6 years to implement when the election cycle is this fall. That sort of thing would be, those kinds of things would be how you'd want to whittle down your universe of infinite alternatives into the ones that you actually want to consider. And then last thing I'll say about this is I strongly suggest making use of alternatives identified but not considered as well. In a business case process, you do want to make sure that you're giving people the opportunity to be creative. But if there are alternatives that are identified by stakeholders or other folks that are involved in your business case process that you don't consider or take forward to the analysis stage for whatever reason, document what those are, document the conversations you had about why those were not things that would be eligible for that analysis process, and put that in your documentation and your final business case as well. That's another place where you have discussions. You can show that you've done your due diligence and deliverance to decide that, yes, we know these things exist, we acknowledge them, we're not unaware of them, but they don't fit in with our process that we're going through right now because of not meeting the problem or opportunity statement, or not being feasible due to assumptions and constraints that we have. So I think that's where I would kind of go with alternatives. Again, I have some information and slides on those from a previous presentation that I think speaks a little bit more clearly to that. But that's kind of where I would shift that conversation towards with the folks that are involved in your business case process. And that goes to the step 2 on this slide. It's one of the very first things that you try to do after you identify what it is you're actually trying to solve from a business perspective. Identify the alternatives, and that includes the ones that are that we're aware of, that could conceivably be considered. Maybe someone else has done them. Maybe someone had that as the idea of how to solve a problem. But if we've decided that they're not going to be considered for some reason, that's a really critical part of that step 2 of the business case process. So one of the things that I wanted to ask folks about is, where does your organization tend to start constructing a business case? What step are you usually at when someone comes to you and says, hey, we need to write a business case about this, or hey, we need to do a business case about something? Has anyone actually had a business case start at the step 1 definition of a problem and opportunity? I'm now looking at the chat, Tim, so I can also make sure that I don't miss any questions, but I see an emphatic no from someone. I will tell you that where I most often see business cases start. Yes, so yeah, that's the couple comments in here. Usually it's working backwards to rationalize why we need it. Usually it's to justify someone's choice, step 5 or step 6. I usually see them at the make a choice stage. We're at the place where we want to make a choice and someone goes, uh-oh, we need a business case because we want to make a choice to do a particular thing, take a particular action. In the case of IT, buy a particular whatever. That's where I see business case discussions start with most organizations. And I think part of that is that we don't have a lot of organizations that have fully embraced or fully understand the value that a business case can have to the deliberative process. If you present the business case as a template to be filled out or a document to write, as opposed to a process to go through to make a decision, then yeah, you're going to get a lot more people that say, well, I made a choice, now I need a business case to justify it. But if we switch that to thinking of it as a process, as a tool in our decision-making toolkit, that can get us, I think, closer to the place where an organization is more likely to engage folks like the people on this call earlier in the process, not to make the decision necessarily, but to facilitate that process to get to a decision that is deliberative and analytically sound. One more kind of pop culture reference to talk about the importance of a shared definition. Parks and Rec is one of my favorites to talk about in the context of public sector work. In this case, Ron, who is the director of the Parks Department, is trying to, he's unwillingly, but still doing it, throwing a barbecue for the Parks Department. And one of the park rangers says, you're not going to slaughter that pig, here are you? Ron says, not to worry, I have a permit. And his permit is a piece of paper that says, oh, I can do what I want. When we don't have agreement about what it is that we need to be able to do the things that we're trying to do, or justify the things that we're trying to justify, you're going to ask for a business case and you're going to get a piece of paper that says, I can do what I want. And that's, again, where the shared definition of not only what the elements of a formal business case are, but a business case as a process come in. Because, if someone's asking for a business case and we don't have agreement on what that means, then, we have a potential to talk past each other and not get at the information that anyone's trying to get at to actually make this a useful process to go through as an organization. We're trying to avoid the pieces of paper that says I can do what I want. We want an actual permit that's gone through the actual process. We want an actual business case that reflects a deliberative process and not something that's kind of constructed after the fact. I do want a piece of paper that says I can do what I want, that would allow me to do what I want, but no one has provided that to me yet or told me how to get one of those yet. So if we can build a shared definition of what a business case is, I think the most logical next step is fitting that business case process into decision-making processes and deciding as an organization when we need to do those business cases. So this is something that I've talked a little bit about before. When a business case is needed depends a lot on the organization and the circumstances of the type of decision that is going to be made. So things that are novel, that have not been attempted before by the organization, are more likely to need business cases than things that are routine, regular decisions. The example that I have given before is, an organization deciding to close down for the day. An organization that is open 24/7 and is required to be is required to have service levels that mean they have regular work and are available. That might be a novel conversation to have. That we may not see that kind of an organization having those conversations all the time. A restaurant that regularly closes early when things are slow, that's a relatively routine conversation. Different kinds of business may have different kinds of conversations that happen more regularly. That would make something novel for one organization but routine for another. So I'm leading up to why I can't say you need a business case always for this kind of decision. It's going to depend to a certain extent on your organization, what your organization does. Same thing goes for immediate and discretionary. If a house is burning down, I do not want the fire department sitting there doing a business case to decide how to go about putting out the fire. You want to have the ability for people to act in emergency situations or situations where time is of the essence, truly. But at the same time, you don't want to have everything be an emergency and always, have gut reactions determining how organizations are acting. So, there are elements of both novelness as well as discretionary action where you have a little bit more time to think about what things are going to look like, how you might approach things differently. Those will impact whether you need a business case or not, or whether a business case will be in the best interests of the organization or not. It's less about how much things cost. It's less about whether it requires an IT solution or any of that kind of stuff. It's more about how it fits into the regular decision-making processes of the organization. So things that definitely need a business case in most cases are complex decision-making processes where you have a lot of moving parts and pieces. Perhaps you have external, either customers or clients, stakeholders involved, things that have long-term implications or create dependencies for other areas of business. Those kind of complexities make a business case more appropriate in those situations. Wicked problems where someone is going to lose out because there's no solution that provides mutual benefit. Those definitely need some sort of justification. That's where the emphasis on once you've completed that process becomes really important. And then again, those novel decisions. If it's the first time your organization is doing something, thinking through it and going through the alternatives and deciding on a course of action based on analysis can only help with a novel decision-making process. And again, organizations that are facing emergencies that need immediate action, stopping to do a business case may not be in the best interest of the organization. Routine and repeated business decisions If you're making a decision on a daily basis, stopping to do a business case every time you need to make that decision may not make sense. The tendency with this conversation is to suddenly have everything become either routine or emergency. Being really deliberative with your organization about when we are truly in emergencies or when we are truly doing routine work is important. And that's part of why this is one of those foundational pieces. You don't want to be having this conversation when folks are, crying and punching the punching bag. You want to have these kinds of agreements made ahead of time so that you can point to them and reference them when you are in the process of deciding whether a business case needs to be completed or not. Every organization has its own thresholds for what decisions should require a business case, and don't wait until you're in the middle of one of them to figure them out. So from my perspective here, I'd say these two purple X's and the things that are novel. Again, getting out of the emergency. If there are things that need more immediate action, but are not truly emergencies, still do a business case if you can. And definitely for things that have more discretionary timelines that are novel, should have business cases for sure. Discretionary, relatively routine things, maybe, depends. That's again where you want to have those conversations and figure out if there are any sort of general thresholds you can set. I would definitely say that things that are routine and immediate, process the applications that come in every day, answer the emails that come in every day, that sort of stuff. Definitely do not need business cases to do that sort of everyday work. And then I'll just go back to the disclaimer again. I am not speaking on behalf of any of the folks that are involved in oversight of projects or programs within the state of Oregon. So if you get guidance that a business case would be appropriate for the project or problem or opportunity that you're trying to solve, definitely follow that guidance and that have those discussions about the utility of the business case with the folks who are providing that oversight to you. Business case processes within decision-making structures. So every organization has some way that they make decisions. It may not be particularly great if all we're doing is looking to one person to kind of make snap decisions, but it is a decision-making mechanism, and it is something that can be pointed to as the way that things get done within an organization. Business cases can fit into existing organization decision-making processes when organizations understand what does and does not require a business case. So when we're looking to someone to make a snap decision, we're most likely going to end up with a business case that does that sort of backwards justification. But if we're looking to prevent snap decisions when we think that we need due diligence because we're doing something for the first time, maybe our decision makers are looking for additional analysis to help understand what the options truly are, we can prevent some of those snap decisions where we're missing that due diligence. The biggest benefit to that is preventing shiny objects. The person who goes to the conference sees the thing, and suddenly it's the thing that we have to have, even though we have no idea why we need it or exactly what it's going to fit into or if it's even feasible to implement. Having a business case process be undertaken in those cases can help prevent some of that shiny object syndrome that gets to a place where we're halfway down the path of implementing something and no one really knows why. We're also looking to prevent reliance solely on intuition and gut feelings. So again, a business case process looks at systematic analysis as its method to articulate what it is that the organization has considered and will end up doing. What that does is get away from the sort of unexplainable, no one really knows why we're doing something decisions, but also it helps with some of that knowledge transfer as well. There are a lot of things that, people who have long storied careers that are more likely to be in some of these higher level decision-making processes that they think about and consider, sometimes even subconsciously, when making decisions. One of the things that a business case can do, or that process can do, is help get some of that information about what it is that they're looking at when they're making a decision or deciding whether something is the right thing to do, out of their heads and onto paper so that others can learn from it. It also helps make those things repeatable as well. So, the next time a decision that is of the same caliber comes up, We don't have to go run and find the person whose gut we relied on the last time. We can look at things like similar business cases and see if there are things that we can learn or glean from those to help make the decision next time. And that goes to the third point here, ensuring repeatability by detailing process in addition to outcome. So if you have an equation and you give me the final answer, that's great. But if I can't see the steps that you took to get there, I may not know that every equation is not going to be solved exactly the same way. Same thing with this. If we can see the steps that we took in a business case, and especially in the final stages of the project or the resulting action from the business case, we can say, hey, we took these steps and made this decision. If this decision ended up being something that took longer, was more expensive, wasn't exactly what we were thinking it was going to be, what can we look at in that process that we went through to improve next time and maybe make a decision that's closer to what we're hoping to achieve with a similar kind of situation. And last but not least, ensuring information gathered and created in the business case process can be used in other organization decision-making processes. So if we're looking at a multi-step decision-making process, and a business case process is just one piece of that, because maybe you have a board, maybe you have a legislative body that you have to go before regarding your decision. That business case will provide additional information that can help inform each of those steps as well. If you just go with the justification and the persuasive sort of rhetorical writing, you don't get that kind of information that could provide facts and figures that would help other folks not involved in the particular step of the decision-making process you're in when a business case is conducted, help them better understand what it is the organization considered, looked at, analyzed, and then ultimately decided to do. So this is where I say, the business case, that document serves a particular purpose, and it's documenting that process as well as the outcomes of it in the form of the alternatives analysis and the ultimate recommendation. No one expects that leadership is going to read a business case aloud in the same way that no one expects that a news anchor on your local news program is going to sit there and read the newspaper at you. Written business cases have a different format and function than members of leadership getting up and making presentations or trying to persuade folks in other ways. But that business case can be really critical in providing information and insight as to what analytically is possible to help your leadership have that information at their fingertips when they're doing those kinds of things that are related but not necessarily the purpose of the business case itself. So just real quick, there are many types of organizational decision-making processes as there are organizations. So figuring out how a business case fits into the rest of that is, again, one of those things that's really difficult to do when you're in the middle of it. And this is not something that you want to be reinventing every time you're having to go through a business case process with an organization. If there are ways to get to understanding what a business case is and then how it will fit into decision-making processes and kind of make those agreements ahead of time, you're in a position where you're going to know whether you're deviating from an agreement that's already been made versus having to decipher whether people are actually in agreement or not in the first place when you're having those kinds of conversations. These last two pieces are relatively short, so I'll kind of jump into those. I don't think I see anything in the chat, but if folks have questions or thoughts and experiences to share, please feel free. Roles and responsibilities, this is, again, one of those things that is very heavily dependent on the organization itself. What roles you have, whether you have business analysts or project managers, really important and difficult to, be able to say every organization should have these exact people involved in a business case process. But I think this is the place where I want to tell the folks on this call that I don't think any single one of us can write a business case. I know that you all have received this request. We need you to write a business case for this decision, for this action, for this project. And this is where I, again, make another pop culture reference, but one does not simply sit down and write a business case. It is a process, and as a process, it has more than one responsible and accountable party in that. This is where I think we all, as part of our positions, can work on changing the narrative around business cases and get away from this idea that someone is responsible for writing a business case and instead shift to someone being responsible for facilitating business case processes. You can still identify who's responsible for filling out the template or putting the final documentation together, but that's kind of a almost ancillary piece to this whole thing if you don't have that understanding that a business case process needs to be gone through by the organization and a business case doesn't need to be written by a single person. The business case has to be a shared responsibility for the organization, and it requires leadership, subject matter experts, and impacted staff to be involved. I've seen so many leadership groups kind of come together and say, all right, assign a business analyst to go write a business case. That's great, but it misses the point of having this be a process that is participatory at all levels. Because the kinds of things that go into a business case, like a problem and opportunity statement and the criteria that are important to consider, those assumptions and constraints, a lot of that is not going to be either known or decipherable by folks who are tasked with filling out the templates or putting together the documentation of the business case. You have to have broader engagement, broader responsibility sharing to be able to effectively do a business case process. And that becomes easier to explain if we shift the narrative from writing a business case to going through a business case process that's facilitated by business analysts, in some cases project managers, as part of that. Broader involvement makes better use of all organizational knowledge. If you have people involved in the first place, it's a lot easier to get the information, wisdom, knowledge that they have and write it down. You don't want to be in a position of proposing a business case that you've gone through all this analysis and you missed a critical assumption that would have changed which alternatives are considered in the first place because you didn't know or didn't have the right person at the table that knew that kind of information. The nice thing about having leadership involved is that they can also prioritize participation. Leadership time is usually pretty hard to come by, and if we need to have people at a table to do a facilitated process rather than someone off writing a draft for someone to review later, that can get folks to be willing to say, hey, we need to prioritize participation here. This is another one of those memes that always ends up in my business case presentations. Is the glass half empty or half full? I wanted a mug, not a glass. That's the kind of thing we're trying to avoid. If you don't have the right people at the table, you might not even be answering the right question or have the right problem or opportunity statement that starts off the entire business case process. So make sure that you know whether you're looking for a glass or a mug, and have the folks at the table who are able to do that. There are general areas where different types of resources are going to be more impactful. Sharing responsibility with leadership when it comes to problem and need statements, your criteria and your assumptions and constraints are going to be really important. Again, if you're not answering the question that your leadership has about a particular problem or need, that's going to not make for a fruitful business case process. You want to make sure that the folks who actually have the ability to define the strategic direction and those problems and needs related to that are part of that process. Subject matter experts are who I look to for alternative definition, especially. There are a lot of people who have a lot of information, especially if they've been in a particular field for a while or are talking with their colleagues in other organizations, other states, other types of work. Those folks are going to have ideas or have seen things that could help inform those alternatives to be considered. And then your impacted staff especially is going to have data. They're going to know how many applications they're processing. They're going to know how many phone calls they get about problems. They're going to know how many people they've talked to about a particular either idea or pain point. Those are the folks that you want to make sure that you're getting involved in that sort of data collection process. And then I have in the little box here that your customers and clients are also super important, but it's really hard to make them responsible for stuff. So that's not to say that you shouldn't engage them, just that it's really important to have contingency plans because you can't really rely on those kinds of folks to be responsible for contributing to a business case process. If you send out a survey and you only get a certain level of response, there's not a whole lot you can do about that. So making sure that if you're going to look for that kind of information, that you have a contingency plan if it's not as forthcoming as you hope it to be. That's important too. So consult your customers and clients, possibly the general public, but avoid making them responsible or accountable for anything related to a business case, just because again, it's really hard to get that sort of level of responsibility. Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, question in the chat. And someone's already said they were thinking about it also. So I think it's a good question in there.
Are there trainings leadership takes to understand their roles and responsibilities in these decisions? Not as far as I'm aware. I know that business cases in particular are discussed quite a bit in various levels of kind of executive leadership meetings. I think that they focus more on business cases as a thing to be completed rather than a process that can be beneficial to an organization. I would love to see perhaps a crossover between a group like this, Bang and PMUG, talking with some of our, I know there's a deputy directors meeting, there's an agency directors meeting, perhaps an opportunity for that sort of joint oversight process to help talk with some of those levels of folks about business cases in a more process-oriented way as opposed to a documentation-oriented way. But I am not aware of that. I think it's a great idea as well. And yes, lots of shiny distractions happen all the time. Definitely lots. Christine.
There are manager and supervisor meetings that happen on the management level in PERS, and maybe there's some trickle down that can happen if that does get disseminated by EIS to those other meetings, the directors meetings and those kinds of things, and they recommend that this is shared out with managers.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to, while it's hard to have the sort of I'll call it the hammer of oversight be the driver of some of that. It is the most effective way to get people that are not aware of the utility of being more active participants in business case processes to kind of sit up and listen pretty darn quickly. So yeah, I think that would be my usual goal in meetings that I have is to make sure someone else gets assigned an action item. But perhaps that's an action item that one of our statewide partners could take, is to at least think about that. And as our bank folks can attest to, I'm happy to have any sort of conversations about business cases at any point, if that would be of help there. Amy, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I raised my hand in error.
No worries. I'm just happy I can see them with the kind of crazy setup I've got going here. So, okay, let me power through the last bit of this because I think this is kind of the easiest piece to talk about because you can't really make any firm recommendations on this. Organizational standards for business cases. I think a lot of folks here are going to be familiar with the idea that, especially things like project management processes, like how we set a schedule and then what that documented schedule looks like, that it's really difficult to make those kinds of decisions about how we generally want to approach those things when we're in the middle of a specific situation that needs a schedule right now. Business cases are the same thing. Standards aren't going to dictate every aspect of a business case, but they can help set expectations before beginning the process. So if we think generally about what business cases mean to an organization and how we want to approach them before we're in the middle of a business case process, we can align expectations, those roles and responsibilities and level of effort or commitment a lot better than, you know, being in the middle of a business case, everyone kind of going, what do we do now? And trying to figure out how to do something that is going to align with the agency's expectations for what it is that we're trying to accomplish with this business case process. In my opinion, this is definitely one of those opinion pieces. The most beneficial standards to discuss ahead of time are the communication method, which we've already talked about being the kind of focal point for a lot of the business case work that's done right now. You know, what are we going to want to have as a template? Are we putting together a PowerPoint? Are we putting together a written document? What sections are those things going to have? You know, I think a great example of that is, you know, not waiting until, you know, you're in the middle of a business case process to decide that, hey, we need to make sure that we have a whole section emphasizing strategic alignment. You know, having that be communicated ahead of time can help determine who needs to be involved and what kinds of conversations need to be had. Which leads to the second bullet point, the team makeup. Who is going to be involved in creating the business case process, facilitating the business case process, providing the input, who's our leadership, our subject matter experts. I know a lot of organizations kind of have a standing rule that if we're going to have a project manager for a project coming out of a business case, that project manager gets involved in the business case process, even if it kind of predates that formal project establishment. You know, having those kinds of agreements generally about who is going to be on that team, what kinds of resources or representation are going to be involved, can be really beneficial and you know, help the organization know, all right, if we need to do a business case because it fits into our kind of quadrants of being novel and discretionary, then we know we need to assign, you know, someone from leadership, we need to assign a business analyst, we need to assign a project manager, that sort of thing. That isn't to say that those are the only folks that need to be involved, but that generally, you know, if we have those kinds of understandings ahead of time, those standards of what team makeup looks like, that we can have a better idea of whether we have the resources and capacity there. Tim, go ahead.
Got another question in the chat, might be more related to your fourth bullet, but the question is about if there are templates to be used, are there any recommendations on how long the business case needs to be? Like how many pages? I know from seeing some templates myself that just looking at the page count on the blank template, I started to get really worried and scared and didn't want to work on it anymore. So I think others are having that same kind of experience. Yeah, I mean, so something longer than I can do what I want on a piece of paper. Definitely shorter than a book, but it's somewhere in the middle of that. And this is one of those things too, where if you're sitting down to write a business case, which is kind of the typical approach, it's going to look more intimidating than if you're going through a business case process and having that sort of drive the documentation of that process as you go. So, you know, this is one of those things where you don't want to be able to sit down and write the executive summary before you write the rest of it, because that means you're at the end of the process and you haven't documented the process as you've gone through. So the most effective business cases that truly get at the level of information that is needed to help your organization make a decision, I've typically seen be between, I'll say 15 and 40 pages. But this is one of those things where don't hold me to that. I'll deny I ever said that, because it really needs to be as long as it is necessary to convey the information that meets the standards that you set with your organization. And perhaps in the third and fourth bullet points here,
in particular, if you're an organization that really values the input of your staff or your clients and customers through qualitative information, having big old block quotes of text is going to take a lot more information, a lot more space than a table of facts and figures. There are some organizations that are going to be super heavily qualitatively oriented, and some that are going to be very quantitatively oriented. That's a conversation to have outside of the context of a specific business case template, and more in terms of as an organization, do we want to communicate? Do we want to ingest data and communicate out using qualitative data that maybe takes up more space, is a little bit different to collect than some of the quantitative data that we have access to? Do we need to quantify things and have complex methods of doing that instead? Either of those would take up business case space to describe, what data you have, how you collected it, what it says, and could make a big difference in page count if you're displaying a table versus, a set of quantitative data points that you've collected. So I hate saying it depends, because I know a lot of people say it depends, and it's kind of a cop-out from answering a question. But in this case, it really and truly depends on the kinds of analysis, the kinds of data, and then how you're going to process that data, what analytical techniques you're going to use, and how much explanation that requires to talk through the process. So yes, this is where your organization needs to know that they're getting a 60-page business case and not a 5-page business case. But they will know that because we've had some of these conversations about how to approach some of the elements of the business case process ahead of time. And they will have been involved in a lot of that work to set the criteria, collect the data, do the analysis by virtue of being on the team or aware of what the team is doing. So that kind of covered the data types and desired analysis. Again, qualitative, quantitative, mixed qual-quant. It's all dependent on what is persuasive to your decision makers, what kind of information they're expecting, and what kinds of standards your organization has for analysis in that way. The last thing I have on this list is business case criteria. This one's a little bit more difficult, I think, because it's really hard to think about this outside of the context of specific situations. The closest thing I can provide as an example is, I think it was several years ago now, that for a while, the statewide procurement process dictated that as part of an experiment, that every I think it was RFP had to have a cost weight of 30%. And trying to see what a standardized cost percentage in terms of consideration of proposals would look like. That's kind of what we're talking about here. Is it possible to decide, hey, we always need to have strategic alignment criteria in our business case? That's the kind of thing we're looking at, as well as cost always needs to be 20 or 40 or 70% of whatever kind of method we're using to rank our alternatives. Either of those kinds of approaches can be beneficial. We know that everyone's going to consider cost to some extent. I don't think there's a single, especially public sector organization where money is not an issue. They can have as much money as they want. So if we're considering cost, in every business case, is there a way to say this is the percentage it should be? Again, same thing with things like strategic alignment, benefits delivery. If security is of particular interest, some sort of security criterion, those kinds of things. If we know that there are particular points of emphasis within the organization or amongst leadership, having those things be kind of standardized as things that we'll always include in business cases can be beneficial. Doesn't mean that you always have to include them, but that allows you to know when you're deviating from a standard versus there not being a standard and us kind of recreating things every single time we need to go through a business case process. There are, of course, many other ways to talk about expectations and standards for business case processes besides just these 4 things. But these, I think, can be helpful and are relatively easy to approach folks that are not particularly familiar with business cases as processes versus written documents with. So this is kind of where I would suggest starting. You know, it's again very possible to fully standardize the business case process. That is not to say that you must then use all of those standards every single time. It just allows you to have a conversation about when it's necessary to deviate from one, knowing that there's a shared understanding of how we go about doing business cases in a particular organization. And yes, this is the don't reinvent the wheel every time. This is, you don't want to be having the how do we do this conversation, you know, every single time you start a business case. Starting from a place of shared understanding, letting stakeholders, you know, have that be a reference point for what a business case process is, so that you're not stuck in that kind of going through the process, the wheel of process as they figure out what it is that they want. You have a starting point that prevents that and allows things to kind of continue moving forward. And then finally, you know, a lot of that standards conversation is predicated on the idea that you're having that conversation before going into a business case process. But if you're in the middle of writing a business case and, you know, having some of these conversations as part of the process, having the opportunity to ask some of those questions like, hey, can this criterion be generalized beyond this particular business case? Can we say that, you know, agency strategic alignment is always important for us to consider in business cases and have that be a standard criterion we include? That's a conversation you can have in the middle of that process as well, so long as it doesn't distract from you know, the task at hand, that particular business case you're trying to complete. Same thing with, is this applicable beyond the specific point in time or for the specific case? You know, again, if you can get folks to think both in the long-term general sort of approach, as well as in a specific context, then go for it. There are a lot of organizations and groups that are going to have a very tough time doing that, though. So, you know, don't stop a business case process to try and come up with standards, but if there are opportunities to discuss them while you're in the middle of one, definitely take them, document those things in the same way that you document you know, some of those agreements and templates and other kinds of things that go into project management processes and artifacts. And then I have one discussion question for you all, and we can kind of close out, and I would love to get thoughts, you know, have you all share your experiences, because I can tell from the chat that a lot of folks have been in similar situations of trying to develop organizational understanding about business cases. But if has your organization leadership come to you and said, you know, with this kind of attitude, we need you to write a business case for this decision that we made. What do you do in those situations? How do you respond to that? I'll share my thought real quick, and then I'll turn it over to other folks that may want to share. And I know we're getting close to time as well. But you know, in those cases, I think we have the conversation up front that says, hey, I get that you want me to write a business case to justify this decision, but we need to go through this business case process. And if you're not willing to go through a business case process to do this, then let's talk about what you need instead of a business case. Because if it's a cost justification, if it's a white paper, if it's a policy statement, whatever, we can do that. But a business case process needs to allow us to consider the alternatives and possibilities. And we're going to have to, you know, go through that systematically and not just have a business analyst go off and write a business case. And through that, we can talk about how to maybe bring in business analysis and start this process earlier next time, before the decision actually gets made. That takes a lot of role courage. But just like our good old friend, that's the park ranger, telling Ron that his piece of paper saying that he can do whatever he wants is not a permit. Sometimes we need the folks who are trusted to be the experts in things like business analysis and project management to tell our leadership, hey, a business case is not just a template that we fill out. It's a process that we need to go through to understand whether we have done our due diligence to justify the decision that we're trying to make. Any other thoughts? I think this is a relatively common occurrence. Again, having folks kind of come and say, hey, we're getting called out on our decision and we need to write a business case for this decision that we made. We're not happy about it, but can you go off and do it? Is that a thing that resonates with folks? Have you been asked to do similar kinds of things, and how have you responded in those kinds of cases?
Well, I guess I'll share. I'm Amy Croucher with the Department of Justice, Division of Child Support, and years ago, a group of folks was pulled together indicating that we need to replace our receipting, the team who receipts our child support payments. We need to replace that process with a new process, and we need to evaluate our options because there are states now that have contractors process the payments in coordination with the agencies, and we need to evaluate that process as well. So we started the business case process. The first draft was in like April of 2019. It went through 26, no, I'm sorry. There's got to be more than that. That was just version 11A was April of 2019. And then we finished that process and got signatures by December of 2019. So that's 8 months just from version 11 to version 26. So it was definitely a process where business analysts, the project management office, senior management, and contracts, and even our business analyst went to another state while they were on vacation and visited their receiving facilities and reported back on that, and we got contracts from other states. So it was definitely a long process, and we were really thorough in our analysis and in presenting the business case for the best possible options to be selected.
That sounds great, and like
Mhm,
a true business case process. I think that the one of the hallmarks of whether you're writing a business case or facilitating a business case process is
mhm,
whether all of the work is happening in things like document review
yep,
of a business case template. And if you're going out and having conversations, if you're
mhm,
engaging folks in other states and kind of going through that sort of data gathering process, to me, you're in the business case as a process versus business case as a document
mhm,
side of things, and that's where we want to get people to be. Again, you can't go off and spend 8 months doing something when the house is on fire,
right,
but when it's a relatively novel thing, like I'm assuming replacing that kind of or revamping that
mhm,
kind of functionality probably is, then yeah,
yes,
you want to put in that kind of effort. You want to have that group together that represents all of those different areas, and kind of have those conversations about what it is that we're trying to accomplish here in terms of doing that analysis and providing that data to really understand what our options are. So that
definitely.
sounds lovely. I'm
Thank you.
glad that people are doing that. What else? Any other thoughts? Anything that folks are in the process of working on? Or ways that you could see potentially having some of these conversations as you're going through business case processes right now for the upcoming biennial budget process. And I'm happy to come be a business case buddy if you need someone to, help talk to folks in your organization about business cases too. So. All right. I think that was 7 in my head. Um, oh, I see someone mentioned understand SMART goals and conduct SWOT analysis. Yes. So those are all things that would go into that either definition of the problem and opportunity, especially when you're talking about SWOT, and SMART goals more into kind of the benefits, the deliverable benefits and objectives of a particular effort, or the way that you would solve a problem. But also, SWOT's a really important part of your alternatives analysis as well. And that's where you want to be sure that you're not highlighting all of the strengths of the thing that you want to do and only highlighting the weaknesses of the things that you don't want to do. You want to have that, systematic process to really consider the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to all of those if you're going to use that technique to evaluate your alternatives. There's nothing like selling something as the best thing since sliced bread, because you don't want to highlight any of the potential downsides or negatives of the thing that you want to do when you're putting a business case forward. That's really easy to see that we kind of have the shiny object happening there if you're not truly doing that sort of analysis to be critical of all of your opportunities that you have. Is anyone requiring business cases to be completed for project approval? So I think there's both the statewide process for that, if we're talking the state of Oregon, and then agencies individually have different approaches to business cases as well. So I've seen organizations that do require business cases as part of their own internal project approval process to decide whether a project moves forward and gets resourcing or not. And I've seen organizations that look to business cases as being something that are completed for the purposes of meeting external oversight mandates. There's, I'm sure, a lot of different places in between those two ends of a dichotomy that you could find organizations along as well. But in general, if we've got agreement on what a business case is, for the most part, I would expect that organizations would start to look at some form of business case as being a critical component of those projects that are kind of, again, on that novel and discretionary side of things more than emergency routine things. All right, I think we have exhausted both the chat and our time for the most part. Thank you all for having me again. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss business cases with you all anytime. And you know where to find me when I'm back next week. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm a nerd and love business cases way more than I should. So happy to talk about these anytime. And Tim, I will toss it back to you. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you again, Rebecca. It was really good, as always, of course. We're setting our expectations for you higher and higher every time we call you in. So far you're meeting them for us. So that's great. As this is a joint Bang and PMUG session, I've got information on the slide that I'm sharing now about the next Bang and the next PMUG sessions that are coming up, as well as our web pages, and the Bang email address is on there. Please, if you aren't signed up for our mailing lists, get onto those websites and find where you can click a little subscribe button or whatever it happens to be. If you're having trouble finding that, just send an email out to whatever contact you might have. If you don't have any, use the Bang email address and send out a contact and we'll get you an answer. We will have, as I've said in the chat a couple times, a PDF version of the slides that Rebecca has already provided to us, and the link to the recording that will be on our YouTube channel, posted to the Bang website within the next week or so. Takes us a little bit of time to get the video all prepped and cleaned up and ready for YouTube and get it posted out there. But we will get that up, and there will be links on our website for those. I also wanted to put out a shameless plug for both the PMUG and the Bang groups that we are basically run by volunteers. Most of us have a full-time job and we don't get paid extra for helping organize these sessions and do things like put together newsletters and go out and find people like Rebecca to come and speak to you. So if you're looking for an opportunity to help in a way like that, please contact Bang or PMUG about that and let us know that you're willing to be a volunteer, because we're always needing more people. Okay, I think that's it. So thank you all for attending, and thank you again, Rebecca. We'll see you all next time.